Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. So in the previous video, we handled the planning phase of our application where we identified the tools that we are going to use, the approach that we are going to take, and finally we structured the project directory. Now in this video, we are going to start building the components starting with the home screen. We're also going to build components that you're going to be reusing throughout the application. And finally, we are going to define the color scheme of our application. So without further ado, let's get started. So to get started, we're going to fire up our application. To do that, we're going to pass in the command debug, set that to 1, and then Python 3 main.py. Let me resize that so that we can code, but at the same time, we can be able to see the changes that we make to our application as we go on. Now I'm going to switch to the templates.py file. Now notice that our application is going to have more than one screen. And because we're going to have more than one screen, it is important that we use the screen manager class that is going to allow us to transition or to actually work with multiple screens. So to do that, I'm going to import the screen manager from kivy.uix.screen-manager. We're going to import the screen manager class. Okay. Once we have the screen manager class, I'm going to create a class called manager for this. So this class is going to inherit from the screen manager class. I'm going to pass it in. Now this manager is going to be our root widget. And because this is going to be our root widget, we are going to also edit the main.py file. Instead of entry points, we're going to be using manager because this is our root widget class. I'll also change this to manager. And with that, we have our manager set as the root widget. Now that we have the manager set as the root widget, we need to be able to add screens to the manager class. So to do that, I'm going to define the constructor. In here, I'm going to pass in the manager and self to the super constructor class. After passing the manager and self as argument to the super constructor, next I'm going to add a screen to that. Now I'm going to change the entry point name to home screen. Okay, so that this can be the screen for our home screen page. And then next, I'm going to create an instance of the home screen class, and then I'm going to add it to the manager as a widget. So I'll say self.homescreen. I'm going to say it's an instance of the home screen class, and then each screen has a name attribute. So I'll give it the name of home screen. Why not? Right? And then we're going to say self, which now is the manager. We're going to add a widget to it that is self.homescreen. Like that. And with that, we have the home screen added as the only widget to our manager class, which is the root widget. The next step, we're going to define the color scheme for our application. Now, KivyMD provides us with the theme CLS attribute with which we can use to style our application. But in this project, we're not going to be using the theme CLS class, but rather we're going to define two dictionaries that are going to hold all the colors that you're going to use. I'm going with this approach for the sake of simplicity. So to do that, I'm going to copy the two color schemes. So we have one dictionary for the text and one dictionary for the background. So this is the BG colors are all the colors that you're going to be using for the background, and the text colors are all the colors that you're going to be using for text. Also, we're going to be interchanging the colors. We can use some of the colors in the background dictionary, in the BG colors dictionary for the text, and vice versa, okay? But then you'll notice that the BG colors require the get color from hex method. So we need to be able to import that. So we'll say from kivy.utils, we're going to import get color from hex. Basically what the get color from hex does, takes a hex code, and then what it does, it converts it to kivy.graphics.color so that we can be able to use it to style the various components that you're going to be using. We also need to be able to access the BG color and the text color from the Kivy lang because we have components that you're going to be defining within the templates.py file, and we have other components that you're going to be defining inside the .kivy lang file, right? And all of these components need to be styled. So to be able to access the BG colors and the text colors from the .kivy file, we're going to be using the import statement. So to do that, I'm going to type in import BG colors. Now BG colors is in the app files folder, and it's in the templates.py file, and it's called BG colors, right? And with that, we can now be able to access the BG colors. So let's do the same for the text color. So I'm just going to copy that, paste it in, and then change BG colors. Let me just select BG color and then Control D, and then change those to text. colors. Okay, and then also I'm going to remove the entry point, and then instead I'm going to pass in home screen. Okay, because we changed the entry point to home screen in the templates.py file. Now that we are done with our setting up everything, the next step, we are going to add widgets in the home screen. So this is the structure of the home screen. Okay, we have the home screen, and then inside the home screen, we are going to have an MD grid layout. We're going to have two main layouts, that is the grid layout and the scroll view. Okay, and we know that the scroll view can only take one widget as a child widget. Okay, that's why we are passing only the MD grid layout as the child to the MD scroll view. The MD grid layout is going to hold two widgets. We're going to have an MD relative layout. That MD relative layout is going to hold the MD label, and then we're also going to have an MD card widget, which is going to hold an MD box layout and an MD relative layout. Now in the box layout, you're going to have labels for your progress and the actual progress in terms of tasks that you've completed. And then the relative layout, you're going to have a rocket PNG there. And then inside this grid layout that is going to be nested inside the MD scroll view, we are going to have 5 cards. The 5 cards are going to represent the 5 task categories that a user can add to our application. So inside VS Code, I'm going to go to the KivyLang to our .kv file, because we only have a single .kv file, but we're going to be adding a new .kv file, and I'll explain that in a few. So inside the home screen, we're going to have two main widgets. We're going to have an MD grid layout, right? In here, we're going to have one column, calls is equals to 1, so that you can only have one columns, and then for rows, that is going to be dependent on the number of widgets that you're going to add inside the MD grid layout. The next widget that you're going to have is an MD scroll view, right? And then inside this scroll view, we are going to have an MD grid layout. Now, because we are going to nest 5 cards inside the grid layout, I'm going to set the rows attribute to 5 to represent the 5 cards that you're going to add, and you're also going to have only a single column. Okay, and with that, we're done with the first structure. Now we can now work with the MD grid layout. Now inside the MD grid layout, we say that we're going to have two layouts. We are going to have an MD relative layout, right? And we're also going to have an MD card. Okay, but notice that if I bring up our application, you'll notice that we are utilizing the MD card widget a lot. So this is a card. Each element inside this grid layout is a card. If I go to add screen, this is a card, this is a card, this is also another card. So you'll notice that we are extensively using the MD card. So because we are going to be using the MD card over and over again, we're going to define it once, set the default properties once, and then we can reuse it throughout the application. So to do that, I'm going to go to the .kv files directory. I'm going to add a new .kv file called components.kv. And then in here, we are going to define a new class, call it card. This is a widget. It's going to inherit from MD card. And then we're going to give it a default background color. So for the background color, because we also need to be able to access the colors from the components.py file, I'm going to copy these 2 lines of code inside the components.kv file. Okay, and then I'm going to set the background color of the card, MD BG color to BG colors. And then what color we are going to be using, we're going to be using BG1. Okay, so here are all the colors. Let me just bring up the colors file. You'll notice that for the BG colors, this is BG1. They're all shades of blue. We have blue, dark blue, almost dark blue, light blue, almost light blue, and then white, right? And then for the text colors, we have this blue, we have this other blue, we have orange, red, and we also have white. Okay, switching back to VS Code, we have set the background color for this to BG1, and because we also want to be able to access this card component that we have created inside the .kv file, we are going to use the include statement. So I'll say include Kivy files, that is a directory, and inside here I want to include components.kv, like that. And with that, we can be able to actually access the card inside of this. So I can change that to card. Okay, but we're going to get an error because we also need to add these components inside the main.py file. Okay, so I will add that by setting that to Kivy files and then components.kv. Yeah, and like that, we can now be able to actually access components defined inside the components.kv inside the KivyLang .kv file. Okay, so we are going to have a single card, and then inside that card we are going to have two layouts. We're going to have an MD box layout, and we're also going to have an MD relative layout. Like I said, this relative layout is where we're going to have our image, the rocket image, and then in here we're going to have labels. So one label for your progress. Let me just bring up the application again. So this and this. One for the actual percentage of tasks that are completed, and this message your progress. Okay, and then inside this MD relative layout is where we're going to define a label, and then the text of the label is going to be the welcome message. Also, you'll notice that we are extensively using the label. So we have this is a label, this is a label. We have so many labels in here. This is a label, this is a label, this is a label. Because we are also utilizing the label a lot, we're also going to define it inside the components.kv. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a file, call it lb, and this lb is going to inherit from md label. Okay, and then in here we're going to define default attributes for all the labels that you're going to use. Now if I switch back to the file to our completed application, you'll notice that we have some of the labels are bolded, right? We have the clean code, for instance, is bolded while the welcome is not bolded. And then if you open the task, once you set the task to be completed, you'll see that it has been stricken through, right? So to be able to do that, we have to set the markup to true, the markup attribute to true. So I'll say markup, set that to true. And then apart from setting the markup to true, we're going to set the adaptive height of every label to true. Okay, and because we are going to be changing the colors of every label that we are going to be working with, we are going to set the theme text color to custom. And by setting that to custom, we can now be able to change the colors of every label that you're going to be using. Now with that, I'm going to switch back to the .kv file, and then inside this MD relative layout, we're going to first define our first label. So lb, right? We're going to give it a text. So this text is basically a placeholder. We're going to change it later on. So I'll say welcome, and then let's set to bold, maybe clean code, right? Like that. Let me change that. Yeah, so we've changed that to, we have changed that, but I cannot see that label. I don't know why. So let me switch back to the templates.py file. We have added the home screen. That is correct. So let me see why we are getting an error. Let me make that big so that we can see if there's actually an error that we're getting. So we're not getting no error, but it's not being, yeah, this is where the error is. There's no error. So I don't really know why we're not getting that, but yeah, let me minimize that back to the, let me minimize that, and then I'll just go to the end. Let me close that and then run our application again. Yeah, so there we have it. Of course, the components.py file had not yet been added because once we changed the main.py file, we had to rerun the code again. Okay, now that we have that done, we have the welcome code. I'm also going to change the size hint, the height of this relative layout. To be able to change that, I'm going to set size hint y property to none. I'm going to set that to none, and then I'm going to give it a height of dp20. I don't want it to be a lot. That is too small. Let's set that to 50. Okay, and then now I can suspend this label at the center that is within the y-axis. So I'll set position hint. To do that, I'll set the position hint. I'll set center y 2.5. Okay, and we have that suspended at the center within the y-axis. And then I'll also give this grid layout a padding, right, so that we can have spacing between our components and the screen. I'll set that to dp7. Nice. And then with that, I'm also going to change the size hint of this card. I'm just going to set its size hint y to none also. Okay, and then I'm going to give it a height of dp200. Okay, just enough so that we can have a rocket in here and the rest of the messages that we need. Now inside this box layout, I'm going to set its orientation to vertical, and then inside here I'm also going to define another MD relative layout so that I can have the LB with the text your progress, right? Let's also make this bold. I'm nesting this LB inside the relative layout so that I can be able to control the position of the label, right? And then because we set the theme text color to custom, I can now change the color of this text. To change that, I'm going to set text color to text color. We're going to be using text colors, and then let's see, what do we have here? If we go back, this is some type of white, right? So I'll search that. It's silver basically. So it's going to be text colors, and then it's going to be txt3, like that. Okay, nice. And then I'm also going to set its font size. Now, when you're setting the font size and icon size, do not use DP, but rather use SP. Okay, so I'm going to set that to 30. Amazing. And then finally, I'm going to nest another LB at the bottom, right? Because I don't want to control the position of this LB. I'm not going to nest it inside a relative layout or any other layout for that matter. And then I'm going to give it a text. So this is basically a placeholder. So I'll say your actual progress for now. Progress, right? And then I want this at the center. So I will say position hint. I'll set your center. Set the center Y 2.5, like that, so that we can have it at the center there. And then for this, I'll give it a text color. I also want it to be white, that's silver. So I'll just copy this like that and paste it in. Also, I want some padding inside of this card. So I'll go to the card and give it a padding. Just give it like DP5 is good, not a lot. Exactly. So we have the first section handled. Also, I'll change the color of this welcome to orange red. I'll come in here and then I will say text color. I will set it to text colors, and then we are using txt is 2 for orange. We're done with the first parent component. Now let's switch to the second parent component. Now we said that the second, not really parent component, but the second component or main component inside the home screen is the scroll view, right? And then the grid layout, and then inside it we're going to have cards. Now let us look at the cards that we have that we're going to be nesting inside this grid layout. Now you'll notice that there are a total of 7 widgets that you're going to be nesting inside each card. So we have the percentage at the far left, the circular progress bar at the far right. We have 2 labels, we have 2 buttons, and then we have another button at the bottom. Now you'll also notice that we are utilizing the btn a lot, so we also need to give it some default properties. Before we can actually add the cards inside the grid layout, we're going to define these buttons that you're going to be using. Okay, so I'll create a new class, call it btn. Now this btn is going to inherit from md fill round flat button. Okay, we're just going to call it btn so that we don't have to write this entire string. This is a mouthful, so if you continue to write it, man, that's going to take a lot of time. So instead we're going to be using btn. Okay, and then we're going to switch back, and then for all our buttons we want them to have an md bg color of, maybe we can use bg colors, and then we can use bg1. Okay, now switching back to the Kivy language, we need to be able to now add those cards inside the grid layout. Now to be able to access this grid layout within the .py file, we are going to be using the ID attribute. So I'm going to give this grid layout an ID of, let's call it grid task, something like that. You can give it whatever name you want. And then I'll switch to the templates.py file. And then because I want to be able to access the IDs attribute of the home screen, I'm going to initialize this class, and then I'm going to pass in the home screen and self as arguments to the super constructor class. And then after that, I'm going to define an attribute that is going to hold this grid layout. So I'll call it grid task, just the same way as the ID. And then I'll say self.get the IDs attribute. And we know that the grid task key holds this MD grid layout. And with this line of code, we are able to now access the grid layout inside the home screen. Now, the next step is we are going to create a custom card that is going to hold all these elements. We are going to divide this card into 3 sections. So the first section is going to hold this label and this circular progress bar. The second section is going to hold these 2 labels and these 2 buttons. And then the last section is going to hold this button. I'll switch to the components.py file, and then I'm going to create a custom card for this. Call it a task card, okay? And because this task card is going to work with attributes from the templates.py file, so the best way to do it is not to define it as we have defined the button, okay, but rather to define a class that is going to represent the task card, okay? So to do that, I'm going to switch to the templates.py file, and in here, I'm going just to create a comment for the components so that I can differentiate where the screens are and where the components are, right? And then in here, I'm going to create a class. I'll call it task the same way, task card, right? So task card, and then this task card is going to inherit from the MD card. So let's import it. Let's say from KivyMD.uyx.card, I'm going to import the MD card, and then I'm going to pass it in. I'm also going to initialize it, but I'm not going to pass the task card as arguments to the SOAP constructor because for some reason I do get errors each and every other time. So instead I'll just leave it like that, and then I'll go back to the components to the KV file, and then we are going to create those three sections that we said. So the first section is going to be an MD relative layout. The second is going to be an MD grid layout with 2 columns and 1 row. These are the 2 columns. So the first column is going to hold the information of the labels, and then the second column is going to hold these 2 buttons. And then next, you're going to have another MD relative layout, and then inside this relative layout is where we're going to have this button. Let me just open up application, this button, okay? Now that we have those 3 sections defined, I'm going to set the size hint of this relative layout to absolute. Why am I setting it to absolute? Because we want to be able to create a canvas. This is a canvas, okay? I'm using the canvas class to create this. If you're ever going to work with the canvas class, okay, you need to ensure that within that container or within that widget that canvas is going to be defined, ensure that the size of that container is absolute, okay? So to do that, I'm going to set the size hint for this to none. Okay, and then I'm going to set the width of this relative layout to be equal to the width of the entire screen, and then the height I'm going to set it to 20 dp. To be able to set the width of this relative layout to be equal to the entire size of the screen, we have to import the window class. So to do that, we're going to go to the top of our file, and then I will say hash and then import. Let's import window from kivy.co.window.window. Okay, and with that line of code, you can now access the window class from the .kv file. And then I will set the size for this. Now size is a tuple for the width and the height. So for the width, I'll set it to window.width. And then for the height, I'm going to set it to dp20, just a small height. Okay, and then for the inside the grid layout, I'm going to nest 2 relative layouts. So MD relative layout for the labels and MD relative layout for the buttons. Okay. Inside here, we are going to have the first LB. So the first LB is basically, we can give it a placeholder for task category, right? And the next, we are going to create another LB. This is just for a placeholder, so I'll say tab, and then for this text is going to be, we can say number of tasks for this category. And then inside here, we want to be able to have the 2 BTN classes. So the first BTN, is going to have the text completed, and the second BTN is going to have the text of left. That is for the tasks that are yet to be completed. Okay, and then finally inside this MD relative layout, we need an icon button. So I'm also going to define an icon button. I'll say IBTN for this. It's going to inherit from MD icon button, right? Like that. We're not going to have default properties for this IBTN, but rather I'm just defining it like this so that we don't have to type the entire MD icon button, but instead just type IBTN, okay, for icon button. And then inside here, so I'm going to have the IBTN, okay, and then I'm going to set its icon attribute to dots horizontal. So we have that done. So we have the 3 sections and everything done. You'll notice that we need to be able to create the circular progress bar for each task card. That is because we have 5 task cards, so each task card has to have its own circular progress bar. So to do that, we need to be able to access this relative layout from the .py file. And we say that to be able to access any widget defined in the .kv file inside the .py file, we're going to be using the ID attribute. So I'll give this an ID attribute of, let's call it circular progress. and then I'll switch to the templates.py file, and then I'll say self.c progress is going to be self.ids, and then get that C progress, right? And with that, we are able to now access this relative layout from the .py file. Next, we are going to programmatically append the 5 task cards inside this grid layout, which we gave it an ID of grid task. So to do that, I'm going to first create a list that is going to hold the task names that you're going to have. So I'll say task categories for this. We are going to have personal, health. We're going to have study. We're also going to have social, and finally we are going to have work. Okay, we're going to have work. It's work, not work. Damn. Okay, and then we are going to say, using a for loop, we'll say for category in self.task categories, we're going to create 5 instances of the task card class. So I'll say task card is going to be task card, right? And then we can now say self.grid task. Now remember that this grid task is a widget. Now what I like to do is I like to be able to add a bit of definition for every widget that has been defined in the .kv file and accessed in the .py file using, I'll say, from KivyMD.uix.widget. We're going to import the MD widget. Okay, and then what I like to do is, because this is an instance of the grid layout, and you know that the grid layout inherits from the MD widget, so that with that we can be able to now access methods and attributes that are specific to widgets from the .py file. So to do that, I'll say grid task dot add widget. So you can see that we have all the attributes and methods that are specific to widgets. We can be able to access them by including this line of code. Okay, so I'll say add widget, and then I'll pass in whatever widget, in this case task card, like that. And with that, we have 5 tasks card added. Don't worry about that. It's because we haven't set the size for the scroll view and the grid layout. So I'll switch back to the .kv file, and in here I'm going to set this size hint y to none, because we basically need to manually set the height. Okay, I'll say height for this scroll view is going to be window.height, and then we are going to subtract the height of this grid layout. And the height of this grid layout is the height of this relative layout and the height of this card. So this is height 200 plus 15, that is 250. So I'm just going to set that to dp 270, and then we can play around with that extra 20 dp. I don't know why we have our tasks like this. So let me switch back to the components.py. Yeah, remember, a card inherits from MD box layout, and you have to set the orientation. By default, the orientation is set to horizontal, but we want the orientation for this specific card to be set to vertical. So I'll say orientation is vertical. Yeah, amazing. So we have that, and then because we have the 2 labels nested inside a relative layout, we can actually control their position. So I'll set the position hint for the first LB or label. I'll set that center Y 2.5. Okay, like that. And then for the second btn, I'm going to set it position hint to right. We're going to set that right to 1 so that we can push it to the far end, like that. Very nice. And then I'm also going to give this grid layout padding of dp7 to match the padding for this. Wait, this is not the grid layout that I need to change. Sorry. So if I go back to the KV file, to this KV file, I want to set the padding of this second grid layout to match the padding of this first grid layout. So I'll just copy this. I'm trying to go for uniformity here. So I'll set that padding to 7. Nice. So everything is padded nicely. But then we also want to change the background color of the home screen. So I'll set the MD BG color. I'll set it to BG colors, and then I'll use BG2. It's a type of blue, very light shade. Yeah, there we have it. And then next, I want to space each card inside this grid layout. So I'll come in here and I'll set the spacing to maybe dp5. I don't want a lot of spacing. Let's set that to dp7. Why not? Right? Nice. But you'll notice that we cannot scroll through the contents of the grid layout, despite the fact that we have nested the grid layout inside the scroll view layout. Now the reason for that is because we also need to manually set the height of the grid layout. But before we set the height of the grid layout, I'm going to switch back to the components.py file, and I'm going to manually set the height of the task card. So to do that, I'll set the size hint y to none. Okay, and then apart from that, I'm going to give it a height of dp. For each, I want to give them a height of 200. I want them to be, want them to look nice. Ooh, 200 is a lot. Let me set that to 180. How's that? Much better, right? Much better. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Where's the fifth? We cannot scroll through that, but we can fix that by switching to the Kivy file. Okay, and then what I'll do, we'll set the size hint for this. Size hint y none. Okay, and then what we're going to do, we're going to give it a height that is equal to the height of each container, of each card nested inside the grid layout. Now we have 5, and each card has a height of 180 dp. Now if I do the math here, because I can do it in my head, I'll say 180 multiplied by the 5 cards that we have, so that is equals to 900 dp. So that means that the height of this grid layout is going to be dp 900. Now I always like to add a small bit of height so that we can actually scroll to the far end. You can see as much as we can now scroll, we cannot scroll to the very far end because we haven't taken into account the spacing and the padding that you've added. So I like to add about maybe 920. Right, let's see how that is. So let me give it 940. That's the last value I'm using. Yeah, that looks nice. So now, irrespective of the screen size or whatever device is going to launch our application, we're always going to scroll to the top and to the bottom. Now, for instance, I'm using a device with a 4.9 inch screen size. Okay, so that means yeah, I have to really take into consideration the fact that I have to access all of this. So you see, irrespective of whatever screen. Now, if I maximize this, right, we can still scroll to the end, scroll to the top. If I minimize this, it is fluid, okay? Because we have actually set the height of the grid layout to match the height of all the components that it nests. Okay, now before we add a floating icon button in here, we're going to add the circular progress bar at the top right and the label for the percentage at the top left. But you'll notice that this icon button is on the left, but it needs to be on the right? So what I'll do, I'll switch back to the components.py file where we have defined the task card, and then I'm going to give it a position hint of right. We're going to set that 1, and then I'm going to give it an MD BG color. We're going to be using BG2 for this, so I'll set BG colors and then BG2 for this. Okay, nice, but it's too big, man. I don't like how big it is, so I'll set the icon size because we're using an icon button. I'll give it a DP, so we're using SP, so I'll set that SP to 20. I don't want it to be too small, but I don't want it to be too big either, right? Nice, looks nice. And then we can set a pad. We can give this this task card a padding of maybe DP5 so that everything can have some spacing. Looks nice, looks really nice. And then I'm going to change the sizes for all the labels that we have in here. So I'll say font size, I'll set that to SP. Let's set this to 15. Yeah, and then for this, I'll set this to 10, the number of tasks, set that to maybe 13. Nice, so we have that, and then I'm going to set, I'm just going to make them, all of them bold, okay? I'm just going to set it to bold, and also set this to bold, okay? And then change their colors, so I'll say it's text color. We're going to set that to BG colors. Like I said, we're going to be interchanging between colors. So it's a BG color, set that to BG1. I like BG1 a lot. And then, yeah, the same for the second label. Right. We are done with the 2 sections. Now let's handle the top section of the task card. Okay. So to do that, because now we can be able to access the MD relative layout from the templates, what you're going to do, I'm going to go to the top of the file and I'm going to import 2 classes because we're going to be using the canvas. So I'll say from Kivy.graphics, we're going to import 2 classes. We're going to be using the line so that we can create a circle and then color. And then inside the task card, I'm going to be using the canvas attribute of the C progress, okay? And to do that, we use the with context manager, self.cprogress.canvas, okay? And then in here, I'm going to define the first color. I'm going to change the color of the entire canvas by setting that to RGB. We're going to be using BG colors and then BG2, okay? That's faded blue. And then we're going to add the first circle. Let's say circle equals to. Now the circle attribute takes 3 default arguments. That is the X, the Y, and then the radius. Okay, so for the X, I'll set that self.cprogress.x and then self.cprogress.y. Okay, and then finally I'll set the radius. We can set that to dp. Because the height of this relative layout is set to 20, I'm going to set the radius to 15 so that we can have some space to play with. And because I'm using the dp function in here, we also have to import it. So to import it, I'll go to the top and then I'll say from kivy.metrics, we're going to import dp. And with that, we have the dp function in here. You'll notice that we actually have that circle right there, but I'll give it a small width. Set that to dp3. Okay, add a comma so that we don't get that error. Take some time. There we have it. So we have that circle right there, but I want this circle at the top right. So to do that, I'm going to import window, the window class. So I'll say from kivy.co.window, let's import the window class, and then we are going to be using the window class. So basically, I'll say instead of progress x, I'll set that to window dot width, okay, the width of the window, so that we can have it at the far end. Well, where are you? Why can't I see it? And then we can subtract the width. Actually, we can subtract the radius, that is 15, so that we can push it back a little. Yeah, so there we have it. It's right there. I'll set that to 30, twice the width, so they can be pushed in a lot. 30, still some of the parts of the circle are not within the task card, so I'll set that to maybe 35, right? How's that? Not yet there. Let's set that to 40. Nice. 40 works. I'll change that to 12. That circle is too big. I don't like it. Too small. Set that to 13. Perfect. Okay. Next, we're going to add the second circle. So I'll change the color of the entire canvas to bad indentation. So instead of BG2, we're going to be using TXT color. Okay. So I'll use TXT colors and then I will use TXT2. Okay, TXT2 also. And then after setting that to TXT2, I'm going now to copy this block of code because we're going to create another circle in the same X and Y coordinates, but we want to be able to now control the start angle and end angle of the second circle. And then I'll change the width for this to 2. And then what I'll do is I'll set the start angle for this. I'll set its start angle to 0. And then I'll set its end angle to a random value. So to do that, I'm going to import random. This is just placeholders, okay? These values are going to be controlled by the task attributes that you're going to add later on. So I'll say import random, and then the start angle is going to be 0. Okay, and then the end angle can be anything. So it can be random, you can say rand range. We're going to start at maybe 10 to the entire area that our circle covers, that is 360. And there we have it. So we have 1 starting at 10, right? So we have this goes to about, I don't know, as you can see, there are basically random values to represent the number of tasks, the percentage of tasks that you have completed, okay? And then finally, to wrap up the components for the home screen, we are going to add an MD relative layout, and then inside this relative layout, we are going to nest an icon button. Okay, icon btn. So the icon for this is going to be plus, but it's not just plus, but it's thick. And then we're going to give it an MD BG color of BG colors, and then we're going to be using BG1 because that is our primary background color, and it contrasts well with white. Sheesh, does it? Yeah, it does. And then we can say theme icon color. We want to be able to change the color of the icon, so you have to set theme icon color to custom first, and then now you can say icon color. I'm going to set that to text colors, and then we're going to use txt2 for that. Okay, and yeah, there we have our button. Now let's put it at the center. I'll say position hint for this icon button is going to be center, x pointer to set that to 0.5. We can give it some padding. To give it some padding, I'm going to set its top 2.6. How's 0.6? Yeah, I think 0.6 is a good value, right? And that basically wraps up all the components that you require for the home screen. So in the next video, we are going to move on to the next screen, that is task creation screen. So that is it for this video, guys. If you have any thoughts or questions, leave them in the comment section below. And then yeah, I'll see you in the next. Bye.